So I'll call the meeting to order, and as usual, the very first thing is we do have a public comment period. Just a heads up here, you'll notice, those of you that have the agenda, that pretty close to the beginning of the meeting, we're going to have the community engagement aspect of it, which involves setting meetings for community forums about possible school reorganization. So the main purpose of this meeting is just to take care of our regular business. If you want to make a comment, you certainly are entitled to, but we'd encourage you, if you have something in depth to say about school reorganization, stick around a little bit, because we'll be setting the dates and the times for those meetings. That said, are there public comments? And seeing none, let's go to a moment for the board to look at the norms and the goals. It's on packet page 2. Sorry, yeah.
There are 3 proposals for revisions.
Right. Dick points out that when you get farther down the agenda, there are 3 proposed changes. Anybody have any comments on goals or norms that we are not meeting? Or any pats on the back? Okay. All right. So the consent agenda, I'll just remind you, if there's something on the consent agenda that you think needs a discussion, you just need to object to it, and we'll take it off the consent agenda.
I move the consent agenda.
Dick Dale moves the consent agenda, which is the minutes of the last 2 meetings. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Alex. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposing, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. Is that better? No. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. All right, that passes unanimously, I believe. It does.
Herb, I think you need to be closer to the mic.
Okay. How's this? It's on. All right. The next item is for the Community Engagement Committee members who are here to vote on the minutes of our last meeting, so that we can then use them to propose something for the entire board. So would a member of the Community Engagement Committee care to move that the committee approve the minutes that are in the packet? Okay, moved by Melanie. Is there a second? Seconded by Lindsay. Any discussion among the Community Engagement Committee? Yeah.
Just the question of, we had proposed dates for things, and they seem to have changed from the letter to the agenda, so I wasn't sure which one if we're going by the agenda dates.
Well, right now, all we're doing is voting on whether our minutes are correct. So the question would be, do the minutes show the dates that we as a committee agreed on? Obviously, we have to reconcile that with what I've understood about school availability not matching our dates, but that'll be the next item.
Yes. Okay.
Any other discussion about the minutes? Okay, would all those members of the Community Engagement Committee who are here and are in favor of the motion to accept the minutes, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? All right, that passes unanimously. Now, the next item is the minutes include a recommendation, but as Lindsay Ralph points out, the dates don't entirely match what's in the board packet. And Randy, do you want to explain why that happened?
The board packet is correct. After the Community Engagement Committee met, you selected dates with locations. When I went back to the principals, buildings weren't available. So we needed to swap. I kept the dates because I felt like that's what the effort had been put into, and put the buildings where there was building availability. So that's why the proposal locations here are different than what the committee proposed. And the teacher and staff one also had to be moved for the exact same reason. There's obviously a lot of things going on at buildings and different availability. So I prioritize the dates. Okay? So what is in the packet as the proposal is what works with all the schools.
Okay.
So it was just MEMS
So-
and Courier that flipped.
And the date for the teachers and staff
Yeah.
changed. Yes.
So looking at packet page 10, would any board member care to move that we do what is on packet page 10? Dick?
I move that all of the dates and all of the schools, and I don't believe, 6 to 8 is the time for each of the meetings.
Right. Notice that there is one thing here that was not in the Community Engagement Committee motion, which is that comments will be limited to 1 minute per person, and there'll be a timekeeper. Just note that's part of the motion. Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Lindsay. Discussion, Dick.
I have a question about confining it to 1 minute. I thought that the 2 minutes, if enforced, give people plenty of time, especially if there's a little latitude. It's a community forum, and I think that even though it may go beyond 8 o'clock, it's important that people have an opportunity to say, so that unless insisted, I don't accept the 1 minute time frame.
So you'd like the motion to read limited to 2 minutes?
I would accept 2 minutes.
You gonna make a motion?
Lindsay, is that okay with you?
Yes.
All right. So the maker of the motion changed it from 1 minute to 2. The second says that's fine. Discussion, John Wilson.
Are we gonna have give people an opportunity to submit written public comment? I think it might be helpful to have, especially if we're limited to 2 minutes, to encourage, is that part of this too? I don't wanna,
It's not in the motion, but we
I
can,
would certainly accept that written comments will be accepted by the board.
yeah, so to elaborate a little bit on that, it might be helpful to, especially, for people who can't come to the meeting, to have, for us to think about, open public comment, for.
well, of course, the board always accepts written comments anyway. There's nothing really new here.
But a person could bring for somebody else the written comments and turn them in that evening.
Absolutely, yeah, that evening or whenever, just think
Or
for us to
whenever.
think about, it might be helpful for us to encourage to have open public comment and our public comments, written comments, and personally, it'd be helpful if if we were to collect all these and be able to look at them together.
I agree with the sentiment, and I think it's consistent with what the community people decided, and so I would certainly say, and written comments to be accepted.
Lindsay and then Jim.
We had discussed at the community engagement of possibly doing a Google form that can get emailed to the Taconic and Green parents or stuff, so they can do it that way, instead of physically collecting and having one person collect them. But that wasn't on the motion, but that was something that I think we did talk about and we're gonna discuss.
Jim?
Yeah, I was just going to support that idea, because I think, if people, the nights we have, they may not be able to come, et cetera. You're having people, have the ability to go to the BRSU website and provide their thoughts. I think it's pretty important, beyond just even handing something in at a meeting. I think having that online and available would be a really good idea.
Well, can we take this up after we vote on the current motion? Because the current motion is not the only thing we can decide about this tonight, but the current motion is simply what's on packet page 10 with a change from 1 minute to 2 minutes. Any more discussion on that motion? Yeah, John. Sorry.
I was just curious if the Community Engagement Committee had any conversation about the alternate formats other than speakers in a line talking, whether there was discussion about having perhaps small group conversations that could be more, where there'd be more of an opportunity to ask questions and understand, rather than just give
I
feedback.
think maybe Suzanne can remember what we did about that. My vague recollection is we decided that each one of us on the board ought to hear from each member of the public that wants to say something, but Suzanne, do you remember anything about that?
Yeah, I do. That was brought up, and it's a good idea. It's just that we wanted to make sure that that information was clear for every single person on the board and couldn't be misinterpreted of any kind from smaller groups. So we just kind of mixed it.
David?
The trade-off on that, though, is if you have small groups, then you can have spontaneous discussions that would go in different directions, so you get potentially more variety. Whereas if you have a long line and it's clear what direction people are going in, you may find that everyone starts saying pretty much the same direction. And so you might get more variety and diversity of ideas and thoughts if you do small groups.
Melanie?
Point taken. Also, I think there was some discomfort with the board being engaged in conversations with questions they couldn't quite answer. And that the idea of this forum was that it became, or at least what we discussed, is that this is strictly for listening and gathering feedback to bring back to the board so that we can figure out what questions we don't have answers to yet. And I think that was kind of the sentiment, is that nobody wanted to get in a position where they, we're stuck without answers. So we want to know what the questions are so that we can get them answered. So then when we go back to the public, knowing that we will go back to the public, we have informed answers for those questions.
One thing that you should know is that the Community Engagement Committee, if you look at our minutes, decided that we were going to meet again on the 17th, which is midway through the community forum. So if we decide at that point something needs to be tweaked, if you would let us, we could tweak it at that point. I'd also want to point out that I suppose currently exactly how the meetings run is going to be pretty much up to the superintendent and the committee, if it's not already addressed in the motion. Jim, and then John, and then Ben.
Yeah, I had sent to the Community Engagement Committee, I had a reach out from a member in our community to David and I, because we're both from Dorset. And there had been some interest in having us sit down with some community members to be able to have a little bit of give and take, answer some questions. I kind of expressed, I said, I'm hesitant to do that without the board's okay, because we, for that same issue, we don't want different messages going to different folks. But at the same time, I think, those sort of meetings could potentially be very useful. But I'm still kind of looking for some direction as to whether or not that would be viewed as a good idea or a bad idea, or if it's potentially a good idea with some guardrails, whatever those are. Just some direction on that question.
If you want to comment on the motion, I'll call on you, but again, I would strongly suggest, why don't we vote on the motion as it is, and then if we want to add more detail, we have a separate motion to do that. Because otherwise we're going to forget what we're talking about here.
Are we going to have another opportunity to?
Yes, anybody can make any motion. Randy.
I just wanted to say that I received a number of people came to me with feedback related to the end time of the last meeting, and feeling like they thought it was going to end earlier, and it went longer than expected. And so I feel like if we are agreeing to 6 to 8, if that's what's in the motion, then we should follow that. I feel like that's respectful, unless we are going to add something that indicates it may go longer, or something that indicates it's not a hard stop at 8 o'clock. So that's my comment on the motion, because some people were not thrilled.
Suzanne?
My impression of this, the forums that are coming up is that they were a listening session for the board, that we're simply there to glean information from the public, and that likely the public has already prepared comments or has idea of things that they want us to know very specifically, that maybe we could figure out if there's if there is conversation to be had, that we figure that out in a different way, but that this is like strictly for listening and gathering information from the public. So that it would have the time, it would be respectful to that time, because people would get a chance to do their 2 minutes or their 1 minute uninterrupted, even by the board, unless there was a direct question, but I don't know how that works.
David?
I wanted to respond to Melanie's comment about small groups, and I'll come back at you. Your point is also well taken. But small groups are very good for raising questions, some of which cannot be answered. But that you're going to encounter that in the big forum as well. I mean, all of us would be sitting there with our mouths open. So the way that each small group could record, the whole point is that ideas get, and questions and concerns are all raised and put on a piece of paper, and then they're compiled together, and everybody sees what all the points are, and you can see, okay, some people, this seems to be the one that everyone raised. And then there are others, but that's another interesting idea, and there's another. So it also can serve a very good way, and you get a lot more people participating. So that was, they can decide, we all can decide how you want to handle it, but I had to respond to your point.
Again, I would urge the board right now just to confine its discussion to what's in the motion. We can talk about format afterwards, but we have members of the public here who may just be staying around because they want to know what the dates are going to be and where. And I think it'd be a service to them if we could just decide that and then go into the rest of the detail later. Could we please do that? Yes.
Respectfully, it is in the motion how we're going to conduct this. And I think that's the thing that people are asking questions about it, because I would agree with David. I think I agree with both, and I think maybe there's some compromise to be made. But if we want to have the specifics in the motion that says comments will be limited to 1 minute per person, and there will be a timekeeper, 2 minutes now, then that negates the option of having small group discussions, because we have dictated it in the motion. So this is about the motion.
Well, I would actually disagree with that. We could decide to have a timekeeper and comments limited to 2 minutes regardless of what the size of the group is. Again, I really would encourage you to just vote on the motion, then vote on the format if you have direction for the superintendent or the committee. But let's take care of the dates and the places while we can.
Why don't we then maybe,
Melanie?
can I recommend that the mover split the motion to dates and times specifically as one motion, and then we can vote on the format separately.
Okay, I'm willing to strict comments will be limited to 2 minutes per person, and there will be a timekeeper from the motion, and we can make another motion with respect to the format, if Lindsay's willing to make that change.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so the motion now is just that forums will be from 6 to 8 p.m. We have the dates, we have the places. Ready to vote on
And the
that?
time.
And we have the times, yes, 6 to 8. Lindsay?
Well, I think only the times go back to kind of what Randy said. Are we doing a hard stop at 8, or are we going to put something in the motion that says, or can go longer?
Well, the committee voted for a hard stop at 8, I believe, didn't we? And I think there was a good reason for that. Some people cannot stay that long.
Since
I would encourage us to keep that in the motion, but do what you want. Dick?
we added, per John's comment, that written comments will be accepted,
Yeah.
which somehow has been lost in this
Well, we just
motion.
make
And I
that-
think written comments should be accepted. That would help with the hard stop, because if somebody's got a comment, either they turn it in then, or send it in, address the board. That was added after John got through his comments.
And I think the intent was that comments would be accepted before the meetings, after the meetings, anytime from the first meeting until after the last meeting, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Are we ready to vote on the motion? All right, all those in favor, and again, this took out the part about limiting comments to 1 minute and being a timekeeper. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, raise your hand. All right, that passes unanimously. Now, format. Somebody want to make a motion? John?
I guess it's more related to the content and the format too. I suggest we have a guiding question or a central question or a short list of guiding questions to drive the forum and, you know, written public comment. I think, you know, leaving it too wide open can drag things along. I would love to see a question like, of the 4 options presented, which do you lean toward, or what are your feedback on each, something like that. But I think with each forum and with each stage of accepting, encouraging open public comment, written comment, having guiding questions, as we learn more, as we weed out options, we can ask new questions. So I would ask that for our community engagement, we center around have an essential question, we call it, and us teachers call it.
I think, Randy, that's pretty much what you had in mind, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm in total agreement. I think without a focus, the information's not useful to the board and we can get lost in information. So I'm in agreement with that as well.
Other comments on the format? You know, if you want to bind us to something in particular, you can make a motion. Otherwise, we're just hearing suggestions, I think. Lindsay?
I kind of like John's idea of maybe the question being, out of these options, which one works for you, or do you see the pros with, or something along those lines? Because that's what it seemed like at Sunderland. People were kind of hinting towards an option without choosing one. So I kind of, you know, maybe if that's our focus, because that's what we're doing, is trying to make a decision.
Yeah, Melanie?
If I recall, Randy, from your presentation, I don't think your presentation is built in a way that really disseminates what the differences would look like between the other options, right, between the 4 options. It is status quo. It was, you know, close 1 or 2 schools, and it, or, you know, have a central middle school and then move kids out. But
Reconfigure.
I don't know that, reconfigure, thank you. I don't know that your presentation provides enough information to people to give feedback on those 3 pieces, other than no status quo, right? If we're talking about reconfiguration versus closing schools, there's not a whole lot in there that says, answers a question about busing, about taxes, about classroom sizes, you know, all the things that we heard at Sunderland. So I guess I'm hesitant to focus on that unless we make sure that we're guiding our presentation in a way, and you're including that information in your presentation that gives answers to the question we ask. Does that make sense?
Yes, so it is in revision
Okay.
for that reason primarily, to add clarity, to add some additional details. Again, that presentation was for the board,
Right.
right? It was not intended for the public. You all had context that the public didn't. So it's being updated so that it has more details and more context. And, you know, the website's updated. We're encouraging people to go there. So it is different, and it does have additional information. It's not done yet,
Okay.
but it's in process, and it will be updated.
Can I just follow up with that
Sure.
really quickly then? If that is the case, and I'm not saying this was long-winded, but that was a long presentation, how much longer is it going to be to cut into that time for public to comment? And do we need to consider that if you're adding additional information?
So I'm shifting things. I'm hoping to keep it to 40 minutes.
Okay,
That's my goal.
so that gives us essentially an hour 15 transition time.
It does. I also think that, you're bringing up a good point. I think if people are wanting to submit information through a Google form but haven't seen the presentation or watched a video, it will be difficult for them to provide information, which I think is probably actually fine because we want people to make informed comments. That's the most useful for the board, for people to have information and then be able to respond to that information and provide input. But that, I think, also has to be part of what is in the form as well.
Dick?
Given the fact that we're looking at approximately an hour and 15 minutes of commentary, it's a complex subject. There's a lot of thoughts, there's a lot of emotion. I'm beginning to lean very much towards breaking the group down into smaller groups and giving more people an opportunity in a quiet, respectful way. And one does not know how many people there are going to be, but groups of, we had 185, I think, at the last one. 11 people, all of us are fully capable of taking notes, writing stuff down, and then it can be quickly synthesized and then summarized and put on the BRSU website with respect to, here are the comments of the group that were made. I don't think an hour and 15 minutes is enough time for a large number of people to have an opportunity to speak.
Lindsay?
Just in response to him, I don't do good in small groups when people come with maybe questions I don't have the answers to, or have some really intense emotions about something. So if that can be a consideration, that not everybody will be comfortable doing that.
Well, one thing to bear in mind is that what we're looking here for is comments. I realize there's going to be some questions because some folks probably will want to have a question answered before they feel they can comment, but it's not, the main emphasis is not Q&A, it's comment. John?
Well, can we make space for those clarifying questions? Because I think that, I wonder after Randy's 40-minute presentation, if we, we're very strict about this and said, all right, now we're going to leave 15, 20 minutes for clarifying questions, only questions with Randy, and then the commentary. Because, I think, the small group idea sounds great, but it's going to be difficult to do for us individually to answer those clarifying questions. So I'd be more open to that if we had a clarifying questions period. Not 2 minutes, not 1 minute. You get 10, 15 seconds to ask a question, and then Randy and the board can answer. So it'd be 40 minutes, Randy presentation, 20 minutes clarifying question, 1 hour commentary.
Madison?
I like Sean's idea of doing that because then it would give people things to think about before going to the commentary. And then if we were to do little groups, would it still be the 2 minute within the groups? And then just the people who are like leading the groups writing down the information and maybe asking the person who commented if what we wrote down as a note explains their thoughts well enough for us to present back as a group. So that we don't, like what she said, misinterpret or misjudge what they said.
Right. If we do small groups, one key thing is that whoever's taking notes to present to everybody needs to make sure that what they're taking a note on actually was what the group thought.
Yeah, so ask the commenter.
Melanie?
I have two thoughts on this. One is, I'm still hesitant going into small groups, being that as a board, we do not have a unifying, we are not unified yet. I don't feel like we are all on the same page, so it does make me feel a little bit uncomfortable all going into different conversations where we will have a very difficult time not answering questions at that table. One, and two, if we do decide to do this where we break up into groups, I think we need to include in the motion, be very specific about how we're going to share that information out and how quickly we're going to share it out with each other and how we're going to disseminate that. It's one thing if we all hear the same voices at the same time. It's very different if we're all getting cliff notes in different ways at different times. And then when will we have the discussion about that in those cliff notes? So I
Well,
just want to make sure that's,
John can speak for himself, but I think his suggestion pretty much cures that problem, because if you have Randy's presentation and then you have a time for folks to ask brief questions so that they have a better understanding of what the presentation is about, so that they can then comment, I really don't see us board members being on the spot during the remaining hour or so to answer questions. We're supposed to be listening at that point. John?
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it's being very clear, if we were to split into small groups, that, maybe having handouts with, some very clear guidelines, expectations, that we're here to listen, we cannot deliberate whatsoever, legally, and those guidelines can, some facilitator guidelines for us too, that maybe the community engagement committee can draft and say, what's that?
by next week.
Oh, you don't meet before then.
Lindsay?
My only question would be with small groups is, if we're doing this hybrid, how would we include people who attend virtually?
Jeff?
Yeah, I'm just, might want to chime in too. I'm not a big fan of the small group idea. I think it'd be a little chaotic and unwieldy. I think we're better off just, following John's idea relative to clarifying questions, but then just have sort of a general comment period after that.
With any kind of restriction?
On the time, for example?
Well, I mean, that's an issue that is really up to the chair, I think. You set a time at a meeting, 6 to 8. If the chair sees 10 people still in line, you're not going to cut them off, I would hope. But I don't think you have to say that it's a hard and fast end at 8. You would just say this is anticipated will be done at 8.
Well, I think if the chair's going to follow the motion that was just passed, the chair has to cut it off at 8.
Well,
I just asked about that.
anyway.
John, and then Jim?
Yeah, I'm good with small group or not. I think if we have I don't think we're going to have the same crowd that we did in Sunderland, so who knows the numbers we're going to get. In Manchester, yeah. And so, but I'm wondering, would it be, are you going to moderate, Herb, or should we have a third-party moderator, whether it's Oliver or, Mike Norath or someone like that, to handle it?
We could certainly invite Oliver. Since Randy is going to be doing the presenting, I think she should be the one that runs it at least until the time is over for questions that people need to have answered before they can even comment. So I think what we're talking about is, well, what happens in the last hour or so? Jim?
Yeah, actually, I kind of wanted to second Jeff's. I think, the small groups, well, it's great in a lot of places. I think it would be sort of a bit chaotic. And one of the things I really worry about is, Madison came up with a good idea of, is this what you meant? Doing that, taking those notes I take minutes for a lot of meetings, and it's not easy to get it right. And there's never going to be time to say, okay, this is what I wrote down. Is this right? Now it's your turn. I think it would be very unwieldy to try to do the small group.
Well, one advantage I can think of with keeping the group together is that we could record the whole meeting, and then if somebody wants to go back and see what some comment was, there's a way of finding it. If it's small groups, we can't be recording them all at the same time.
Agreed.
I would like to move that the format of the meeting be a 40-minute or so presentation by the superintendent, followed by approximately 20 minutes of clarifying questions, followed by commentary from the public, with the moderator being, in this particular case, the chair, with a reminder before we start that we really do want to leave by 8, but still give everyone an opportunity to speak, and remind you that if you want to elaborate on comments, that you can submit something in writing either tonight or anytime before our November meeting.
Is there a
If
second?
that's the case, that's my motion.
Is there a second? Seconded by Jim? Okay.
I was
Yeah.
thinking- One comment quick
Melanie.
about that is that I'm happy to put together a Google form that we can have a QR code available, and a matching with the exact same verbiage, piece of paper that people can submit in writing that night also.
Yep.
At the time.
John?
Randy, do you want input for like that driving essential question, or do you want, or is that something the board does, or Randy deals with that?
Suzanne?
I was just going to say with that question, because I think it was brought up that we wanted to have focused questions that were,
Yeah.
in order to kind of more funnel the information. I just want to be careful that the board isn't leading the public to any decisions. That one thing that I noticed from the last meeting with Sunderland, even though it was unintended, the consequences, is that I was able to learn some things about the situation, both from, from multiple standpoints that I hadn't considered previously. So I just don't want us to, well, I think it's a good idea to focus. Somehow I just want to make sure those questions are broad stroke enough so that people feel that they can still express fully what it is that they want to say. I don't know what the answer to that is, but just not too specific, maybe.
Leading, yeah.
Yeah, leading.
Any other discussion on Dick's motion? I think he pretty much covered the waterfront there. All right, all those in favor of Dick's motion, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. And anybody abstaining, raise your hand. All right, that passes, but with opposition. Anything else regarding the format before we get to the final point on the agenda about community engagement? Dick?
I would again second your earlier comment that the Community Engagement Committee have an opportunity after a couple of them to revisit the entire issue so that in fact we get the kind of information Suzanne just talked about.
Right, we're going to be meeting on the 17th of October. We have one final point, which is, is there additional information that the board still needs before these meetings begin? Lindsay?
Well, I guess my question would be like, before the meetings begin, or what we think will be needed in the presentation or with, to make a decision. Because one of the things I don't feel I have any information on is money, expenses, and savings. So is that what you're asking for, or you're just asking? Because I think that would be something that the public would also want to know about.
I think Randy intends to add something about that to what she presented at Sunderland. Am I right, Randy?
Well, we presented savings for closing a couple of schools. It's very, very hard for us to speculate in a lot of iterations. We're going to try. I'm just not totally sure what we're going to be able to come up with. That there's certainly nothing concrete that we can give because I have no idea where we're going. We're in the middle of starting to build FY26 budgets. So right now it's wide open, right? There's no real limit on possibilities. So I feel like I can't give a lot of financial information until we have something to actually work from, because I genuinely can't ask Sue to run numbers for all the possibilities right now while we're trying to develop the budget. We do not have the capacity until there's something to actually like run.
Can I follow up?
Lindsay?
No, what about something like what it costs to run each school? Because if you're presenting closing a school, that would potentially be a factor into,
Yes, so we gave like, it's about $1 million for Courier, about $1 million for Sunderland, that was in the last presentation. When you say run the school, it's hard to quantify that. You know, is it personnel, is it operational costs, is it, you know, upkeep in the next 5 years? What, because we don't build the budget school by school, right? We don't build it that way, so the information isn't available in any organized way for me to pull a school out and give you information. It all needs to be aggregated, and then depending on which options we move forward with, that could potentially determine staffing needs or resource needs. And so it's like there literally is endless possibilities of what we could give you, and at the end of the day, it's all speculation right now.
Suzanne?
So I want to get you something, I just don't know how to give you something that is super meaningful. We can keep thinking about it. I don't know if you have anything to add, but I'm just sensitive to what we're trying to accomplish right now too.
Yeah, I know, I think you're 100% giving you something meaningful. We would need guidelines as to what it is you want to see. We can put numbers together to support whatever scenario you might be talking about, but we need to know what that scenario is first. So the numbers that were presented were speculation on what would happen if we closed these two buildings, also taking into consideration that there would be staffing changes. In other words, the costs that we showed you were not the total cost for both buildings, because we would expect some of those staff would move into the other buildings. And that's speculation. Randy's saying, okay, I think we're going to need to keep this many staff members, so we estimate that. That's the kind of ballparking we would do, but we would need guidance on what scenario specifically are you looking for, because decisions have to be made around putting those numbers together.
Suzanne, then Ben?
When we saw the presentation, you had broken things down into priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. Can maybe we have some more specifics on what, for example, even if it's just what priority 1 contains, like what, I think it was safety, it was some, you know, there were a couple other factors, but maybe we could break those numbers down a little bit.
That's all available on the website.
Oh, it is?
In
Okay.
the report from the facilities evaluations.
So
So
it's
it's available to everybody right now, it's been there, so I would encourage you to look there.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Ben?
you're welcome.
One thing that would be helpful, Randy, is timeline on the decisions we're making. So some of these decisions, if we're talking about reconfiguration, what's actually feasible in a year? If we're talking about construction, we're looking at 3-5 years out, right? So some of these decisions that we're asking people to make, it's not binary, like choose 1, 2, 3, or 4 for next year. It's like, no, option 4 is for 5 years from now if you're lucky, right? And so in the meantime, we're gonna have to make some other decisions before then. So it gets very tricky, and I think that perhaps is a point of confusion for us and for community members on what are these are decisions that have to be made within the next year, and then these are decisions that we're gonna need to make within 3 to 5 years, 10 years, and maybe you don't go all the way out, but at least laying out that there's the time component to this would be
Right.
helpful.
Right.
Melanie? Then Dick?
I know at the Sunderland meeting, we had discussed about having an action item, and I think I suggested, can we talk about looking at closing Sunderland School? I am wondering at what point and when and how we get to the point where we can say, Randy, can you give us all the facts and figures of what it would look like when we close Sunderland? And can you study that for us? We present that, and then at the next meeting, we say, okay, Randy, if we were to reconfigure, and we have one meeting fully on reconfiguring, what does that look like? Because I don't think, even us as a board, that is such a complex thing, we cannot really dissect all of those things all at once. So, maybe this is for consideration after MEMS, But maybe we really need to consider, instead of doing the same format at every school, getting more targeted what these options are and keep making sure we're broadcasting them, recording them so that people can follow along, so that when people are discussing this at Dorset, it's not the same thing that they've heard at MEMS and at Sunderland, but now they're on to the next phase and the next item. Because I really appreciate that you need to get targeted, and I think we need to get targeted too. And as long as it's only listening, we're not coming to any real, we're not making progress is what I'm feeling like. I feel like we're not making any progress because we're not asking you to be specific enough in digestible chunks.
Right.
Dick and then Jim.
I'm feeling like the financial stuff really can be assembled a little further down the line. I'm mostly concerned that the public be fully apprised with what the educational advantages are and disadvantages. And by education, I mean the totality of education that we're about to hear if we get there. With respect to school goals and what's going on in the schools. To me, the comment that resonated the most at the Sunderland meeting was, it's not about buildings, it's about what's happening to our kids in terms of education and what's happening to our community if we lose our perception of a central hub. Well, we know that Deb answered that by saying schools as a central hub have been, the hub has been changing a number of different ways, and still schools persist and communities rally around their children. The most important thing is it shouldn't be about buildings. It should be about educational advantage, and I mean the full range. And what are some of the problems that will have to be addressed going forward? If the advantages are overwhelming, and it sounds like by you saying, we need to do this, what we're doing now isn't working. Here's why it's not working. Here's what happens if we do X, Y, and Z, and the advantages to that. Mm-hmm. Then it makes a difference with respect to what it might cost the community. Communities have to decide how they're going to be stewards of their youth's education and the future. We are all, takes a community, we're all stewards of that process. And so what we want is we want the big picture, but we also want to know specifically those short-term goals, problems, and advantages so that I can relate if it happens next year or the year after, what's going to happen to my children?
Jim?
Yeah, this is kind of going in the same direction as Dick, I think. I think, to me, we're looking, there are so many different possibilities here, and we're trying to get all the information to be able to look at every single possibility. And like Randy said, I don't think we, that's sort of almost an impossible task. I keep coming back to, this is, what got us started on all this was looking at middle school.
Right.
What are we going to do about middle school? And I think, to some extent, when we're looking at what our options are, one of our first, major decisions is what do we actually want to do with middle school? Are we going to leave it in 3 different schools, or are we going to centralize it? And then start to, work on what are the follow-ons to that. Mm-hmm. That's what's led us down. We started off, what are we going to do with middle school? And then we realized, but that's going to change everything else. But I think we still need to move in the direction of figuring out what are we going to do to improve the quality of education for middle schoolers in the Taconic and Green. And then, from there, that to some extent is going to determine a narrower set of options down the road.
This is a real important conversation, but I do want to call the board's attention to all the other agenda items that follow the one we're on right now. I think we're already looking at staying beyond 9 o'clock. John?
Yeah, I want to return to the question I've brought up before about our role as a policy governance board, and what do we see the next steps beyond the community engagement, beyond the forums? Are we envisioning that we help to solicit, feedback and insights on Randy's behalf, so she can develop a first draft of a master plan? That's initially what I thought when we dissolved the middle school committee, that thinking was that we were going to get a master plan from Randy as a policy governance board, that, that wasn't our role to drive that vision. We can provide some insight or some feedback, but it's not our role as a policy governance board to shape that. So I just want to be clear, are we thinking that, okay, are we leading the visioning process, or are we supporting the visioning process? Are we, and where,
of where we started 2.5 years ago. I'm going to clearly say to you, well, I was going to wait till after the presentation. I guess I'm just going to say it ahead of time. We can't just keep waiting, because this is about our kids and their education. And I fundamentally believe we can do better than we are with our middle schoolers, and that we have a responsibility to that. So it's just like, I feel like every month, every quarter goes by, and there's more information that supports that. So the middle school cannot be wholly separated from the rest of our system. So I am saying to you how I feel. I'm saying to you what I see. The evidence is clear as far as I'm concerned, and we do have to start moving.
So given that segue, given the fact it's almost 7:30, could we move on to the next item?
Ask John.
Do we have 2 more comments?
Yeah, comment.
I'm sorry. And thank you, Randy, for that clarity. For further clarity, it would be great for you to think about, and then with that July 1st date is in my head now. With that in mind, what are the deliverables you need from us as a board? What do you need for us to get done? What do you need to be crystal clear? What's our to-do list? Would be fantastic to help guide our work.
Yeah, I need to know which direction you want to go as board.
Right.
And so I've laid out 4 options. That's the starting point for you. I would like to know where you want to go. I can do the rest.
Jeff?
Yeah, just to be brief, on those 4 options, I think it's imperative that we talk about quality, but I think it would be a big mistake not to have some discussion about financial implications as well. So just so that's clear, my 2 cents.
Agreed.
Thank you for saying what I was going to say.
I
Lindsay?
just have a quick question. I thought what you wanted from us, when we were doing the community forums, to gather information, because then you were going to have the board vote on an option for the master plan. Is that not what was intended? That was my understanding. Not that you were going to tell us an option you wanted and we had
Correct.
to. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The board, we need to start moving. So the idea would be that the community forums provide you with information. You might come back to me for more information. Ultimately, you're feeling more informed. Even some of the questions that came up at the last meeting, I've already got answers to. Those are going to be in the future presentations. So I'll keep iterating in order to make sure that you have as much information as possible. But yeah, the idea is we're making some decisions about at least narrowing the scope so we can get more granular on a more narrow kind of perspective of what options we can do.
Are we set to move to the next item? I think we are.
Okay, so Skylar's going to present to you. As you know, every fall, we provide you with update on the school goals from last year, SU goals from last year, and new goals for this year. So we continue to adjust our process, so this is going to be a little bit different than how it's been in the past. And I will turn it over to you.
Great, okay. So, I'm Skylar LeBombard, the Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning at the BRSU. Joined here, I'd like to recognize that all of our Taconic and Green principals, as well as our Director of Special Education for the BRSU, are present tonight. So if you have school-specific questions or a wonderful resource, they're in their buildings every day, caring for the adults and students that make us all happen. So it's important to get their perspectives as well. So as Dick had alluded to, students are more than just a number. However, the state level accountability system very much relies on students as a number. In fact, as a public school in the state of Vermont, we're required to set goals. Those of you that have been with us for a while, or we're at the BRSU meeting, it's going to sound somewhat similar, but we'll give you school specifics. Those public schools in the state of Vermont are required to set 2 goals, at least in these 2 content areas. So academic proficiency, you can see the 4 bullets that well maybe not because it's a little bit small. Curriculum coordination, local assessment system, instructional practices, proficiency-based learning. Those fall under academic proficiency. We are required as a supervisory union to set a goal in that area, as well as each individual public school in the state of Vermont as well. Safe and healthy schools is also a requirement. That includes things like multi-tiered systems of support. So what types of supports are we going to provide to those students who might not be progressing through their academic experience? Social emotional health, physical well-being, and physical environment. So those are the 2 larger buckets broken down into specifics. So what I'll do tonight is talk a little bit about the overarching goal, and then I'll mention school-specific goals that were nested underneath, because essentially, as an organization, as a supervisory union, we kind of set the pace for the districts that are, governed by us. So I will also I'll ask that you take note of questions as they arise, and we'll address those questions at the end, because it might be that one of our principals is better suited than I am. Question. And also, throughout this presentation, you'll see pictures of kids from all over our schools and projects as well. It's important to remember, again, that students are more than just a test score. Last year, we set a goal using iReady, which is our computer adaptive assessment system that is norm reference around 9 million students for both reading and mathematics. We'll go into specific results, and I'll show you some fun graphs. Our goal is about 5% increase in both reading and mathematics. School change is difficult. In the last 2 years, we've introduced 2 new main curricular resources. This was our 2nd year using Reveal Math as an instructional resource. And last year was the introduction of Into Reading and Into Literature for our reading programs. So with school change, sometimes comes an absence of growth as we try to educate teachers in the new methodologies, particularly in reading. The perspective and approach was very science and reading oriented, which some of our folks were able to adapt quickly and embrace, and it was more challenging for other folks. So typically in a new implementation, you might see an implementation dip, and you might see a regression. We did not see that in reading this year. We actually performed the same in terms of percentage of students proficient on this particular assessment. The way that this assessment works is everything in essentially the standardized test industry is bell curved. So realistically, the pull is to the middle. So you're outpacing the bell curve, it's trying to pull you back. So we can look at the norm group very shortly, but in reading we didn't see any growth. In math we saw a 1% decrease. One of the challenges with math is the fact that it was center stage the year before last in our first year of implementation, and we saw a 5% growth. So this year, where it was at the elementary level specifically, because our middle school teachers typically content specialized, so they're math teachers and only math teachers, or math and science teachers, but our folks that are asked to teach all content areas at the elementary level to introduce 2 new curricular resources in back-to-back years. It's pretty brutal. It was because we had access to federal relief funds that we were able to even do so. So it was kind of like our hand was forced, really. So we did not meet our academic goals in terms of a 5% increase in students scoring down by school, we had Courier Memorial School who specifically focused on the area of phonics, and they were shooting for a 5% increase. They were not able to meet that goal due to a variety of barriers and things of that nature. We'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. Floodbrook set a broad reading goal of 6% more students meeting their proficiency. They were not able to meet that goal. Manchester set goals in both reading and mathematics. We saw a 2% increase in reading and a 2% regression in math. At Dorset, reading goals were set for grades 3 through 8. They were not able to meet that goal. And then in Sunderland, which is our only school who focused specifically on mathematics, although she chose a very ambitious metric to target, they were not able to meet that goal either. So the next couple of slides will be these bar graphs that will show you, stacked bar graphs that will show you comparisons from the national norm from spring of 1819. The assessment company is still using this as the last typical year of a child's education prior to COVID. You'll see the national year to date, which represents spring of this past school year, and that end size for reading is 8.2 million students. And you'll see our district performance out of 982 student results stacked. So we outpaced the national norm. We actually, in reading, we also outperformed the pre-COVID norm reference group. At the BRSU presentation, Lindsay had asked the question, can we break it down by grade level? So here it is broken down by grade level. To Randy's point, you might start to see some patterns emerging as we advance into the middle school grades. Additionally, I can reference state level assessment data that is not yet public. It's still in its preliminary stages at the state, actually. But locally, we're not able to publicly share our organizational performance. Individual student reports went home on the state level assessment, but we can't really publicly report because they still have to validate that they got all of our kids, and it is what they say it is. So we rely on local data. There's actually a correlational study going on right now between iReady and Vermont Comprehensive Assessment. Previously, when we were using SBAC as the state level assessment, there was a correlational study that confirmed that those two assessments were correlated. We choose to use a local assessment because it's a much faster turnaround time. Typically, well, actually February will be when the public performance of Vermont schools will be available broadly, and that doesn't really do us well when we're trying to set goals for this school year. To have an assessment that students take the previous May be publicly reportable in February. Actually, Randy and I and one of our principals, two of our principals actually, had a relatively candid conversation with the interim secretary of education on her listen and learn tour last week in Bennington, where I spoke about kind of the nature of the lag time on the state assessment and how it's not particularly useful for both sides. So, as you can see here, you start off in kindergarten. So something about this assessment, right? Kindergarten there is no 3 grade levels below kindergarten, right? So that's why you don't see that 1, 2, 3 grade levels below with any significance. As we progress through to the higher grades, you'll start to see those populations stack up a little bit. Okay? Broadly, if we're just giving it a quick glance, we're on pace or outperforming the national year to date. So all of those 9 million or 8.2 million kids, we're outpacing those grades K to 5. Okay, when we start to get 6th to 8th grade, we actually are outpacing them there as well. But you can see there's a significant population of students that are 3 grade levels or below. The challenge with middle school is typical middle school models. We try to intervene early so that kids aren't 3 grade levels below when they land in 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. The challenge there is middle school teachers are largely content specialists. So when you teach a 7th grade ELA class, English Language Arts, you don't necessarily have the background in how to teach a child to read. So that's something that we've actually have a success story where we had one of our middle school ELA teachers run into this consistently at one of our schools. And she decided she wanted to take matters into her own hands, and she pursued a master's degree with a reading focus. And now she's a reading specialist at one of our schools for kids at the younger grades. Okay, so that's how reading bears out. This is mathematics. Again, relatively similar performance. We're outpacing the national norm We're close to on pace with the pre-COVID warm group from 1819. End size for this one is 9.5 million kids for this one. Okay. Similarly, you start to see patterns emerge where the number of students that are 2 and 3 grade levels start to grow as we move forward. But relatively speaking, we're performing pretty well compared to the national norm groups by grade level. And similarly, you start to see somewhat concerning sizes of students that are 2 or 3 grade levels below by the time they get to middle school. We do have, in some of our schools, not all of our middle schools, it might actually be all of our middle schools now, we have math interventionists. We don't necessarily have reading interventionists at those grade levels, so that is an area of need as well. Okay. So what does it all mean? There are some things that we can point to, like the adoption of 2 new curricular resources in back-to-back years that can get in the way of progress. A significant aspect that has plagued us since COVID has been a drastic increase in the number of students missing 30 or more days of school. Prior to COVID, it was about 0.9% of students. So that number at its peak, the 2021 school year, I believe we were up to 8%. That's like 80 kids across our system missed 30 plus days of school. So that is an astronomical number of days of school to miss. So if we lower that threshold, that number obviously goes up. We had been trending well in the 22-23 school year. That number shrunk, I believe, from 8% to 3%. And last year it was at 4%. So attendance remains somewhat of a challenge for some of our folks. And I know our principals are keeping an eye on that. It's on an agenda for an administrative meeting tomorrow. Historically marginalized by race, we often have to combine our subgroups so that nothing is particularly identifiable. It's part of the reason why we can't report out on subgroups by school as well, because our marginalized populations are often small enough to figure out, oh, well, it's that student. We don't do it by grade level for the same reason. So what we did is we took historically marginalized populations and we put them together. So in this instance, it's historically marginalized by race versus non-historically marginalized by race, right? So the N size for the historically marginalized group is about 73 students. The N size for the non-historically marginalized population is about 915. So when I looked at the percentage of those populations that were proficient, there was a difference. The students that are historically marginalized are less proficient in both reading and mathematics, based on that statistical analysis. Some challenges that we faced, again, year 1 of reading into literature, year 2 of reveal math, changing people's habits, especially we have a relatively veteran teaching force, asking them to do something new and different. It's a tall order and it takes time. And typically with a new resource implementation, you're looking at about 3 years to see the full effect. So this is year 3 for math. So hopefully we'll see a positive result. In addition to that, whenever you introduce something new, our schools are small enough to where some grade level teachers don't have a colleague in the building. You may be the only 2nd grade teacher in your building. Some of our smaller schools, you may teach 1st and 2nd grade. So we really value the time that we're able, this Friday is an example of this, where we're able to get our grade level teachers from across schools together to unpack the new resources, share their experience, tips and tricks, and what they've had success in doing, because in a small school it can be relatively isolated. One of the things that affected us deeply was as we made the more equitable decision to approach just as every student participates and every student has that opportunity, we functionally lost some of the ability to get horizontal teams together. So I think it was a worthy cause in that, just received rave reviews from our students and a lot of our staff members as well. We have shifted our approach, just will be relatively similar to last year, but we have banked some of that horizontal team time. Like I said, this Friday at Manchester will be an opportunity for those teachers to get together. Okay. Some of my principal principal colleagues, they shared kind of their perspectives on themes that arose as to why they were challenged in meeting their growth goals. Curriculum implementation, like I mentioned, was a big one. We had an instructional coach position that was vacant all year, so that impacted 2 of our schools. Typically, our instructional coaching model is perfectly designed to help people implement new resources. But one of those, at the time, our instructional coach moved to be the assistant principal at one of our schools. She has since returned to her role in instructional coaching, but last year that position was vacant. It's not a teaching position where we can fill it with someone, get them an emergency or provisional license and have them teach. An instructional coach is a highly skilled position that implies significant knowledge of what we're doing. So staff pulled to cover classes. Staff absenteeism is something that challenges us, particularly even in our larger schools, I will say. I actually was talking to Principal Shulman earlier today about staffing challenges and coverage. But in our smaller schools, sometimes it takes things like your interventionist not having the ability to serve kids in a day so that they can cover a class because they weren't able to secure a substitute. So that takes away from the kids that theoretically need the most support to provide a basic level of need for everyone else. Okay. In the past, last year, we had no math intervention at the elementary grades. So if students had trouble with math, it was up to the classroom teacher to be the jack of all trades. If students had trouble with reading or English language arts, we have interventionists for that at the elementary level. So those were some of the school-specific data implications that some of my colleagues might be able to reference during the question portion. So what does it all mean? For this year, we've actually shifted our focus from the percentage of students being proficient to the number of students reaching their annual typical growth. What that does, focusing specifically on growth, really wraps around all kids in a way that it's achievable. If a student is 3 grade levels below, the likelihood that they'll close that gap of 3 grade levels in a year is a really tall order. So focusing on growth allows us to say, hey, you grew a year plus, and it's gap closing. The way that this works is the typical growth is the average performance over an academic year of students that are the same biological age and grade. They use a variety of factors to identify. Out of our years existing as a testing company and the millions of kids we see every year, this student shares these characteristics. This is typically what we see for a year's worth of growth. Okay. And again, we're a little bit ambitious with 5%. We are ahead of the theoretical curve already. We have 56% of students meeting their growth in reading, and 51% of our kids meeting their growth in math. So what are we going to do differently this year to meet this goal? I know that the ENS policies, and particularly things outside of academic performance, are of concern to you all. So it feels disingenuous for me to come up here annually and just talk about test scores. So project-based learning is something we value. Community connection, that's also a value. Civics and citizenship is also a value of, I believe, the entire organization. Project-based learning is something that we have kind of struggled to implement because we have an instructional coach that is focused on the middle school, but she's split between 3 different sites. So on any given day, she might be at one of our schools every Wednesday. The problem is if a teacher is absent, then it's a week that until they can connect again. So that's one of the challenges with having this itinerant staff. She did host a summer institute where we integrate project-based learning into the curriculum itself, as opposed to treating project-based learning as something else, which was a challenge that a lot of our academic-minded middle school teachers had. I want to teach math. I'm a math teacher. I have to do a project that involves math, but that seems separate because my pacing says that I shouldn't be here. So that's kind of a mindset that's significantly more traditional than I think we're going for. So our instructional coaches really had to work personally with those folks to get them to consider how they might incorporate content into things beyond a one-and-done assignment. We have structured literacy. That's happening at the state level. Act 139 requires that we have a plan for the science of reading. Their initiative actually launched last Wednesday. It's called Vermont Reads. I would encourage you to check it out on the AOE website. There are certain requirements that we'll have to meet as of July 1st of 2025. I'm happy to report that we're well on our way to meeting those student-based accountability is something that you will hear a lot about in the future. You've heard a lot about it already. We launched on our website today explaining to the community what benefits-based accountability is. We're going to start to populate that with status reports so that you'll get more than just, here's how we're doing on this test. You'll get, here's how we're serving our communities and wraparound services, meeting student needs that might be non-academic. I've met several times with the heads of our PTOs from all of our schools to talk about what we can do to get them in the schools. You'll see when we get to the SEL, the Safe and Healthy Schools section, you'll see that a lot of parents don't necessarily feel like they have the opportunity to contribute to their school community during the school day, typically. We've streamlined our assessments. We assessed earlier than we ever have this year. We've kept a tighter window to get kids the help they need earlier. We are using EduClimber, which is a data management tool that will pull in a variety of assessment results, both SEL assessments, academic assessments, behavioral referrals, and concerns. We're looking at potentially collecting nurse visits to try to really paint a whole picture. Attendance is also one of those metrics that it's going to pull in. Try and paint a full picture of what's happening to the person and not just how is the student scoring. Our principals are doing focused walkthroughs that are curriculum-based to ensure that the programming that we've invested in is happening in the classrooms. That leads to some pretty interesting conversations, and everyone's maintaining a growth mindset. So I'm certain that they might be able to share with you kind of how they've grown as a result of that as well. Okay, we have school-based teams, particularly at Floodbrook. We saw this in the Courier Bowl last year, targeting phonics specifically. Floodbrook, I believe, has 3 different teams. You have your primary team, your I wing, and your middle school. They have identified, they've analyzed that and identified very specific elements to do their part in meeting the school goal. We are hosting EdCamp sessions. Floodbrook is also a great example of this, where we look at the expertise from within our walls, and we allow them, provide time and space for them to grow with one another, as opposed to having a third-party consultant come in. Kind of a horror story from last year is we had scheduled a consultant for interreading on 3 separate occasions, and on 2 of them, they canceled the day before. And we were left trying to figure out how to move forward with that. So with that, we leveraged the expertise, including our instructional coaches and department chairs, etc. There's been community literacy and math events. The Wild Robot was our last year One District, One Book. Everyone's going to see that movie. Courier students went today. I saw it with my family over the weekend. It's wonderful. I highly suggest it. Project-based learning opportunities in interreading and inquiry ed. Again, our middle level instructional coach is really trying to integrate kids into doing larger scale, long-term projects like culture. And the way we're going to do that was very qualitative. We were going to ask, quite frankly. We do have some quantitative metrics to help paint a picture or support some of that qualitative data. The main one is the Devereaux Student Strengths Assessment Mini. It's DESA for short. I don't believe I included the graphs in this one. At the BRSU one, I did. Essentially, students take an 8-question survey. I'll show you what that looks like. Then, from those 8 questions, there's a chance that expands out, to the dismay of some folks, to a 72-question survey about a student. And that data is then put into 3 separate buckets. There's students that are in need of instruction, for healthy relationships, etc. Students that are typical for their age, and then students where this is a strength. So this wasn't a perfect science. This was our first year using this tool. It was not implemented with as much fidelity as I would have liked to see. We had about 600 respondents in the fall, and the same 600 respondents in the spring. And over that time, we saw a 3% increase in the students, or 3% decrease in the students in need for instruction, and teachers identified 6% more kids where these types of things like safe and healthy relationships were now a strength. Individual school goals in these areas, again, kind of under the nest of the BRSU goal, positive connections, family response rate for couriers. Ms. Perillo would like to see more families respond to some of the surveys. That's always a challenge. Surveys are super valuable, but they're hard to really blanket and go deep into the population that you see opinions from. She saw an increase, but she didn't meet her goal. So she had more people responding to those surveys, but not as much as she wanted. At Flintbrook, they wanted a sense of belonging increase. So that was for both students and staff. And Mrs. Galson was able to meet that. Manchester had a sense of community. I will tell you that, this is a little bit squishy in terms of qualitative versus quantitative data. The feedback that I got from parents at Manchester was that it was a wonderful year in terms of participation. And I know Literacy Night was a huge hit. The Wild Robot, I went to the launch and then the conclusion. We were in the news with Manchester, so that was a really positive sense of community around that school last year. Behavioral expectations and respect at Dorset, using a not super specific, but they use a different metric to measure than some of our other schools. And it was anecdotally met, and Ms. Moran will be able to provide some insight if you're interested. And in Sunderland, what was used was caring coins. They were active recognitions of positive interactions among students. So, and we saw an increase in those. Okay? So we go to our main tool as an SU that we use. It's a screening, DESA Mini. It's a screening tool. Again, it's 8 questions. It should take about 1 to 2 minutes to complete. It produces a single score. It can progress monitor. It can be used to identify a student in need. 8 domains of social emotional wellness. Our school counselors identified this particular tool, so it wasn't just an individual, it was that whole team of school counselors. That's what it looks like. 100% can't read that from where you are. So it is a 5-point Likert scale. During the past 4 weeks, how often did a student accept responsibility for what they did, do something nice for someone, speak about positive things, pay attention, contribute to group efforts, perform the steps in a task in order, show care when doing a project or schoolwork, and then follow the advice of the trusted parent. So there are multiple forms. So not every teacher fills out the same questions for every kid. We issue a school climate survey to families every spring, and it contains 21 questions. We saw an increase of about 25 families, or 25 responses, more this year than last. It's a 4-point Likert scale. Again, one of the areas that we're targeting, based on this data, is the most negatively associated question was, I frequently volunteer to help on special projects at my students' school. So the challenge with that is it because there are opportunities to volunteer, or is it because people don't want to come to schools? We saw negative associations related to fair treatment of students, consistent enforcement of school rules, staff communication from staff to families, as well as fairness in school rules. Some of those themes were strong enough for Manchester Elementary and Middle School to develop a student code of conduct over the course of the second half of last year that families get as part of their packet at the beginning of the year as part of their handbook. Staff know it. There is consistent response to student behavior that is clear. Okay. As I mentioned, what are we going to do differently this year to continue the positive cultures in our school? SU-wide field trip for the Wild Robot. By October 11th, every single one of our schools will have taken the entirety of their schools. Roughly, there might be some kindergarten classes that are left behind because they didn't read the book last year. That will make connections. So if you're not familiar, I believe you all got copies of the book last year, right? If you haven't had the opportunity to read it, it's very strongly themed in acceptance and community. So that's an opportunity at the beginning of this school year to revisit those themes. Love, Include, and Trust. We have teams and student experience meetings at our schools. That's work that we do with Jamil Adams. Working with him is at our opening launch day as well. Some middle schools are having their students take retreats to work as a team. Increased communication is a goal across the board. Responsive classroom. We had 38 staff members, maybe more actually. Okay. recall the exact number, went to a 4-day responsive classroom training held in Manchester in the middle of August this year. We're seeing some of those impacts already. More parent community events. Instead of doing the one district, one book that we did last year, each school, I believe everyone participating, is going to select a specific book to read as an entire school. So that will help in selecting specific themes that might be of value for being working with a specific school. And we are working to have our school counselors align social and emotional learning instruction, which is actually an educator quality standard requirement. Okay. So our goal is to continue this positive association with the school community at large. We use a variety of qualitative and quantitative data to get there. Okay. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer, or we'll allow one of my colleagues who might be able to provide you with more thoughtful recommendations.
Are there any questions?
Ben?
Thank you.
I'm just curious if you're doing, looking back at absenteeism as a big issue. I'm curious if you're doing any analysis of the whys and whens of student absenteeism, getting any data on that.
Yes. It's challenging. We have school-specific answers.
I was just gonna say,
Okay. Oh, you can hear me. Do you want to do this to everybody can hear you?
I can speak loudly to the rest of the room. My question was whether we're collecting data on the whys and whens around related to absenteeism, and if that's helping to inform then your reaction as a district or as schools specifically.
Is any school-based want to answer? Or
We absolutely collect why a child is out. That's done by administrative assistant. We meet monthly as an attendance team to look at trends and look at anything that needs to be visited to see how we would change behavior.
so for those of you who may not been able to hear that, reasons for absences are collected and then analyzed monthly to look at ways in which we can mitigate against continued absence.
One, I just want to say, no.
I just didn't know if anybody else wanted to talk about what was happening at other schools.
She did it.
So one, thank you for including the grades in the breakdown. Thanks for the grades.
Oh, absolutely.
But just going off of what Ben was saying, and I think I asked last time, but I can't remember the answer. After a certain amount of missed schools, doesn't this school have to report something to the state? Okay.
Yes. Yes, we do. Our colleagues. We have to follow Bennington County's truancy procedures. So after 5 days, I believe we have to get together with outside the family. 7 days we set a meeting. After 10 days, it's true. We all,
For those schools that are in Bennington County.
Is that consecutive
I just
or?
want to clarify on that part of it, that the law is based on unexcused absences. And the difficulty that we have, the challenges that we face, is that legally if a parent says a child is sick, they are legally sick, and it doesn't go against what the rules are. That's what gets complicated for all of us. But we all have been honing in on how to address it. It's a very complex process that involves a lot of coordinated service plans and letters, documentation, etc. But that's just a complicating factor.
So to clarify on the data collection that I mentioned, 30 plus, that is any absence. It's not unexcused or excused, because regardless of whether it's an excused absence, it has an educational impact. So that's what we focus on.
I think Randy wants to say something.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that the challenge, right, even post-COVID, is if we think about analyses, there's two things that we see happening more now than we did before. One is many students out for longer periods of time for illness. I think we're still seeing some residual behavior and practices around illness or COVID. The second is a lot of kids taking trips. Like a lot of kids missing school for families taking them for a vacation or a trip or something like that. And so we do, to Skylar's point, excused or unexcused is to some extent less important to me than the fact that they're not in their seats ready to learn and we know the impact. So that's, we have a growth plan that our principals use. It's every month. It's got really a wide scope of work to complete that month, questions to ask, data to analyze, information for us to talk about, and attendance is one of those things. And even, today I was at our club work for the day, and that was a conversation with Johanna. Have you analyzed your September data, attendance data? How are you responding? What are you doing? Because this is for sure big time on my mind. So for those of you who haven't seen me in October yet, it's coming.
Suzanne?
I just have one quick question, and it's from the beginning of the presentation. How do the schools determine the percentage of growth that they're trying to meet over the course of the year? Because 5%, for example, is a very big number. And so, I mean, it's an ambitious goal, and I admire that. I just want to know how you come to that decision of what percent you want to shoot for.
I mean, schools are variable in size, right?
Oh, right.
So each student is valued differently,
Sure.
so why don't you have a small school and a large?
It is a very difficult decision to make. I've always felt that shoot high, and if we don't make it, we're still moving ahead. And I have gotten more, my goal used to be 80% of our kids are going to be reading because that's what we want, or we want 100%. But I have started to look at it in more granular terms now and looked more at 10% or a more reasonable goal at this point, although I still do want 100%.
Small school folks.
We all have leadership teams, and we look through, dive through, and analyze all of the data that's related to our academics and our social emotional health in our buildings. And that's really where we hone down on what area we're going to focus on for our year. And I just want to make one quick correction that we actually surpassed our goal for parents responding because our daily kids are awesome. So, no correction.
To that point, that's actually, that's one thing I had was, how do you get people to participate in these surveys where other people are not? Like, is there a way that maybe that could be shared between schools?
So when we did the climate survey the year prior, we didn't feel like we had enough information from our families to really say, hey, people are really worried about this, so we're going to make a goal based on this area of an outcome of the survey. So we made our goal, we need more people to participate in the survey so we can get more voices. And it was not without a lot of effort. So we kind of made a game out of it. And we had free ice cream coupons for the whole family once surveys were completed. We had a raffle for a grocery store gift card, and I bugged people a lot. Probably to the point that some blocked me, but it's okay because we got a lot of really great information from families, and we were able to develop our goal, which was finding more ways to celebrate kids, their successes, and put some focus on the positive with individual students. And so we developed a bunch of action steps towards that based on their feedback.
So Carolyn had previously shared with me an occasion where she had a parent on the phone and took that as an opportunity to ask those survey questions and complete it. So it's that type of initiative that things.
Other questions or comments for Skylar? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
next item on the agenda is monitoring policy 2.7. If you look at packet page 24, see what's written about that. I guess the only thing we would need to do here is to see if anybody has any questions for the superintendent about
Correct.
her
Policy 2.7.
interpretation or her evidence. Dick?
We wrote the policy a long time ago. This particular one has thou shalt not built into most of it. My question is, you made a suggestion because some administrators have multiple year contracts. How would you suggest that the policy get rewritten, since it says in no event longer than 1 year and in all events subject to losses in revenue, since most of the people are staff, not long-term, they're not teachers per se, because those are annually renewed, except for those who've been around a long time. So what do you suggest needs to be done in order to be in compliance, since it was largely predicated not on the administrators' contact, our staff, but rather on teachers in the classroom?
So BRSU has multi-year contracts for central office administrators. In your case, it's principals. The principals sitting in this room. I can say to you that if we only offer 1-year contracts to principals, that is not going to be a recruitment and retention asset to us. We need to be able to do that. So I would say that the language right there does need to be adjusted. I didn't think, I actually didn't think through what the recommendation would be for me, because I felt like my responsibility was to point out to you that I felt like we weren't really in compliance, and then the policy committee would review it.
So
But I just am saying that my recommendation is that we change it.
So the average length of tenure that is productive and is offered to principals would be how many years?
We have generally 2 or 3 year contracts with principals.
So would this policy be fixed if we got rid of in no event longer than 1 year, but kept everything, and in all events, create obligations over the longer term, over a longer term where I don't know how to express this so that it covers the vast majority. Perhaps we should talk about this outside of the board meeting.
Yes. My recommendation was policy committee, I think.
That's fine. But the task is multifaceted, and I don't want to craft language, but we can talk about it after the meeting or later.
Anything else on 2.7?
I would.
Looks like Melanie.
I just want to clarify, I think Randy was just recommending the policy committee take that up. Should we ask the policy committee to do that?
Well, yeah, it should be,
Before we move on?
probably.
I'm sorry, what was your question?
I'll make a motion for the policy committee to address policy 2.7 with respect to the issue of multi-year contracts.
Is there a second? Seconded by Melanie. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Raise your hand. Anybody opposed, raise your hand. Anybody abstaining? Appears to pass unanimously. It does pass unanimously. Anything else on 2.7? Okay. Policy 1.0 is listed as an
approval.
action item, but I don't think it actually is an action item. Is it, Randy?
I put it in there because you typically approve the monitoring reports in the second meeting. but, or don't approve it, but you've always approved them so far, so. But, because you review it the first, then you give the feedback. You don't have to, but.
Well, do I have a motion?
I move that we accept as submitted the commentary as well as adjudge it to be satisfactory.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by David. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. That appears to pass unanimously, and it does. So now we're into the superintendent's update. Randy, anything you want to call our attention to in particular? I know it's already in the packet.
It is in the packet. As Skylar talked about the Wild Robot movie, it sounds like Courier had a fantastic time today, which is exciting. Who doesn't love movie and popcorn on a book that the entire building read? I have information in here that is, I think, relevant. Transportation. I am letting you know about the challenges we're having with bus drivers. It's not getting better. And I think every community except one has had interrupted runs, some for very extended periods of time. And we're doing all we can. The schools are putting out information. Floodbrook has a big bus out in front with like, we need bus drivers. A big sign. Yeah, it's like a bus with a sign on it. You really can't miss it.
Yeah, especially if your son is supposed to ride on that bus.
It's not running, it has a driver. So I am talking to anybody and everybody. I'm just saying, the reality is people aren't going to move here to be a bus driver. The drivers are in our communities now, and so the more we can do to encourage people, we will support them in getting their CDL. We'll do any of a number of things, but it's definitely challenging. And so I put staffing in here too. I think it's important that you recognize the challenges we're facing with filling some positions specifically related to special education. And, Caitlin's here. I don't even know. How many people, Caitlin, accepted positions then, like, 2 weeks before school started, a day before school started, 2 days after school started? People walked off or didn't show up? Like 3?
Yes.
3?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's 3.
Yeah, 4, maybe more. So that's incredibly challenging, and I think it's very important that you as a board understand that. And we know there's special ed shortages across the state, probably across the country, and Caitlin's trying to lead the department and provide the services in the very best way we can, but we can't fill some of those positions, so.
Okay, Suzanne, Lindsay, then Suzanne.
I just want to say we skipped over the action item of the survey results.
No, I don't believe we did.
We did the policy 2.7, and then we went to the monitoring, superintendent's monitor report, but we didn't do the survey results, approve it.
We approved this whether we're accepting.
I thought we
Yeah.
We did?
We
I thought
approved
it was
it.
just survey results.
we approved it.
We just did it fast.
Oh, okay, I must have missed that part. All right, I just want to make sure we didn't miss something. Okay, sorry.
But Suzanne?
2 quick things. Are we advertising for bus drivers in, other communities outside of here? And I'm sure we are, like just, ads in other locations besides just the community, because people might be looking for jobs in forums outside here.
So we have advertised in the greater area.
Okay.
So up on the mountain, Chester,
Okay.
like in New York. I mean, Rutland, we've extended to the reach that we felt was reasonable that people would potentially drive.
Got it.
Yeah. We didn't we didn't do like Middlebury or Burlington, I don't think. Yeah.
No, it wouldn't make sense, yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to know is with the staff no-shows you said after hiring, how many was that you said?
4, 3?
There's 3 in
Three.
my student service department, but I do believe there are others outside of my department.
And they were staff or they were teachers?
Teachers.
They were teaching, did they give a reason why they just,
Oh, wide range.
yeah,
It
okay,
really didn't have to do with us.
right, understood. Okay, thank you.
Dick?
Over the last couple of years, we have done things to try and show our genuine appreciation of faculty. We also revised opened the negotiations for the staff. And my question is predicated on the fact that part of our inability to be competitive, the bus salaries, is predicated on the contract. Do we need to reopen negotiations with the staff in order to become competitive in terms of staff? Because you'll remember that when we did the whole thing, bus salaries were increased, but not obviously enough. Do we need to reopen? And if that's the case, do we need board sanction to reopen the contract? And once it's open, then all sorts of issues surface.
Okay. So, we have been working on something.
You don't have to say exactly what it is, because it's a good...
We have been working on something, but we can't really say what it is.
Right.
And no, it does, this is a fantastic conversation. We're doing something, we can't tell you what it is, we can't even talk about it, but yes, we're trying to do something. It does not involve opening negotiations, it does involve a side letter.
It's legal.
A side letter, because of exactly what you're talking about. We're trying to come up with a solution that we can work within, that we can present to the association for a side letter. So when we work with them, if it ends up that we're able to come up with something with them, it will come to you at a meeting for you to sign.
Okay.
Since I haven't proposed anything to anybody, I can't really talk about it yet.
That's fine. You answered my question. Not at this time.
Melanie?
Not at this time.
Melanie?
You probably already have, but I just want to publicly question. Since this also affects our high school students in a couple different schools, I know it affects students that go to BBA as well. Have we, and might you want to reach out? I know there's a number of people that drive for buses, for athletics, etc. There might be a pool there to hit up, at least for temporary answers. And have you tried partnering with them yet?
So schools are taking our bus drivers to drive for their athletic events. It is an unbelievably competitive environment right now, and bus drivers for other places are not protected by the union and agreement, and ours are. So we have a more complicated situation than other people do, and their lack of a contract or an agreement puts us at a disadvantage. So we're trying to work our way through that.
Understood. Thank you.
Lindsay?
Just quick on, bus driver.
Sorry, go ahead.
You can run.
No, I do have something I need to say, but go ahead. I just thought, sorry. Go ahead.
The bus drivers usually, being the bus driver your morning and afternoon, is there any way that, maybe to entice it so that there's not that they can't get a second job kind of thing because their time in the middle is limited before their next bus route, that they can have another position within the school, say a sub or say like a support staff or something, so that way we can retain them kind of multi-positional, so to speak?
Yeah, we try to do that wherever we can.
Yeah, I mean, we have positions like that, available in some of the larger schools, and they're advertised, and we do have, not often drivers, sometimes our bus assistants who are in that same boat will take those positions so that they are filling up their day. But it is a different job, and they have to be interested in doing that work. So, yeah, but there are openings there are slots for those types of duty midday positions.
Yeah, and that was kind of,
Yes.
two birds at one stone type of.
Anything else on the superintendent's report? Dick?
You say in H 630 BOCES bill, that's some kind of legislative speak. I understand that it does refer to some kind of Board of Cooperative Education, and you're going to discuss it. But the next time we discuss it, can we lose the acronyms and...
Yeah, that's why I spelled it out, Board of Cooperative Education Services.
I saw that, but
Okay.
I'm sort of confused that we have to consider establishing yet another board.
I would encourage you to read the bill. That's why I put it in here, so that you do have an opportunity to look at it and see the language that's in the legislation. And so when we do, and I will let you know, but I encourage you to read it sometime over the next couple of months, because the board will have to vote, and I have some concerns. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other comments or questions on the superintendent's report? Then can we move on to the FY25 anticipated budget? I assume that's there mostly just to inform us, but if anybody has any questions about it, I guess this would be the right time to ask them. Anybody need more time with that item? Looks not. Let's move then to...
Wait, hold on. Can you just hold on for 1 second? We were just doing FY25 anticipated.
Yes.
You just did it.
Yeah.
Were you ready for something else?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't know if
We
you
did
wanted
have
to bring
something
this
to
up.
say. Sorry, I was going to say it in my superintendent report. I have a whole post-it here reminding me. I told Sue, don't let me forget, and then I forgot. So then I was saying to her, let's do it during FY25 anticipated, but then it came and went, and we still didn't say it. So I want, it's late, sorry. We've got a whole lot more to do. It's not a big deal, but I think it's important that you're aware. We are overspending FY25 extracurricular line because of athletic official payment.
One of the lines in enrichment, yes. There's other reasons that we're overspending enrichment, but this is one of them.
This is the big one.
Oh, just because of that.
Compensation for athletic officials
Do you happen to have the
is
line
higher than we
number?
thought.
I can look. Give me 1 second.
But that's,
But officials are costing more.
So,
Yeah, it's just costing us more. We were not competitive. There was guidance given from the athletic department for what payment should be. That meant in the moment we were needing to make adjustments in order to have officials for our athletic events.
Either that or
that's
you don't
like
get
$6,000.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's within line 248 and 246.
It's 248 and 246.
So there's an overspending there of a little over $6,000, and it's due official rate pay.
I just wanted you to be aware of it because it's not a line we typically, do anything with, and
Thank you.
that's it.
All right. Anything else before we move on to the policy committee update? No. So, Dick, do you want to speak to those
Do we have to
points?
approve the minutes? Or do we just go to the action item?
I think you could do that since it does say minutes approval here.
I move the minutes be approved.
Second.
Moved and seconded, and again, just policy committee members vote on this,
Suzanne.
please.
there weren't any minutes in the package though, are there?
It
They're not in the packet?
No.
No, didn't make it, but that's all right.
Oh,
So
It
it's
was
got
part
us
of
to
the-
approve.
But
We can
it's
approve
the
it.
action items that are the key. The goal number 1, we were asked to,
wait, we have a motion here first. You made it.
I'll second.
It's been seconded.
but it was approved.
No, we didn't call it yet.
No, we haven't voted on it yet.
Suzanne raised her hand. So did
So
Jeff.
those policy committee members who are here and are in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Okay, anybody on the policy committee opposing it, raise your hand. Appears to pass unanimously from the policy committee. Now go ahead.
Goal number 1, if you go back to the beginning, we were asked to make it reasonable, and the board will, so we changed it, the board will continue to use a governance model that looks to the future and fosters high level of effectiveness and efficiency. Getting rid of that, the phrase that people objected to. I move that action item.
Seconded by Suzanne, I think, okay. Any discussion? I think what that avoided was the idea that we weren't using it yet. Wasn't that the reason
Yes.
for the change? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining?
Then
Appears to pass unanimously, and it does.
We were asked to put a new goal number 5, reacting to the improved board performance. The policy committee recommends the following language. The board will develop and add to the board work plan an annual improvement objective with at least one specific area for improvement at the annual August board retreat after conducting and discussing its own evaluation.
Is there a second? Seconded by Suzanne. Any discussion? Melanie?
Does that mean we will not add this until next August?
I didn't hear.
She
We
wants to know
will,
if that
so-
means it won't be added till next August.
Yes,
Okay.
Any other discussion?
but that doesn't mean we can't do something this year independent of that goal.
Any
Would
other
the-
discussion?
Yeah, would the policy committee recommend that we do something independent?
Well, that was the consensus and the reason why one of the goals was supposed to be adding this as a part of our objective each year, part of our goal.
Other discussion? All right, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. That appears to pass unanimously, and it does.
The
Third item.
last item is, we took the wording that was 2.5, which is the first paragraph, and added 2.51B, a minimum of 2 executive-level leaders identified by the board annually by the September board meeting should be immediately updated to the board should any noted successor cease to be employed by the district. That was to take care of the eventuality that the board needs to be informed if one of the designated September successors suddenly is no longer with the school system.
Is there a second? Seconded by Melanie, okay. I should point out that Dick is in danger of being struck by Carver lightning because this is not phrased as a negative.
Go ahead. I'm ready.
Melanie?
Do we have a definition of what an executive leader is at our board? Because I don't believe we do.
I can tell you there's not a definition in the definitions section anyway.
I feel like it's an ad hoc committee, and if we're going to put it into our policy, we should be really specific and understand exactly what that means.
Could I suggest that maybe the committee could rewrite this to have the proper negative so Carver will not haunt us and at the same time address what Melanie's talking about? Jim?
Yeah, I'd agree with the negative point, but it, and you could just change it to be consistent between A and B, because A says, 2 other executives efficiently, and then so just, you can make it consistent between A and B in some way.
Yeah, but can we still address that? I don't think we have a working definition. Who are the executives of our board?
No, but these are, but this is all specifically about who steps in if the superintendent is no longer there, so. This isn't a general executive.
For administrative team.
Yeah.
Okay,
This is a very specific definition.
I'm understanding it now in context. I guess I was reading it as 2 executives of our board would be notified. But you're saying the entire board would be notified if 2 executive level leaders. Okay,
If the,
thank you. I
if the
understand.
vice president designated, anyway, yeah.
If I designated Skylar
Right.
as one of the people to replace me if something should happen to me, and then Skylar, for some reason, I can't even imagine what that could ever be,
He gets
isn't
hired as
working
the
for us, I have a
superintendent of New York.
responsibility to let you know that who the person is who is now in that seat.
I understand. Yeah, I think I was just reading it wrong.
I think, but that's my
Yeah.
understanding.
No, that makes sense.
Dick, do you want to keep that motion on the floor, or do you want to withdraw it and tinker it a little bit?
I don't want to withdraw it. You vote it down, and then we'll have to do it. But I think it's perfectly understandable. And if somebody else wants to take over as chair of the policy committee, because they're better wordsmiths than I am, have at it.
Could we not just amend it right now?
You
Make
could.
it a negative?
Yeah.
Yes, I'd be willing to do that.
So moved.
Go ahead, if you've got a suggestion
How about
of
the board,
language.
the board shall,
Not fail?
No.
shall not
The
fail to be,
Superintendent. Superintendent.
okay. I was gonna say the board shall not fail to be updated, but yes, you're right.
The superintendent shall not fail
Fail to
to.
update the board, right?
Immediately should one of the 2 identified executive team members no longer work for the district.
Maybe just to help Dawn with the minutes, could somebody, maybe Ben, can you just repeat that?
Ooh, I don't know, I did it in pairing with those 3 over there. The superintendent shall not fail to identify the board,
Inform the board.
to inform the board immediately should any noted successor cease to be employed by the district.
Problem.
Okay. Is that okay with you, Dick?
Yes?
Okay. And I forget who seconded it. I think Jim. Okay with you? All right. Any other discussion?
And that is important if it's,
Please, I think it should be added to the work plan because effectively, we're all going to try as best we can to attend. So it's part of our board level work plan to be at the forum.
are you expecting these meetings to all be warned and conduct business?
I wasn't anyway.
Okay, I wasn't either, I just want to make sure there will be a quorum. I'm expecting, we didn't actually talk about that.
But could we make, maybe we can combine this though. Could they appear in the work plan not as board meetings, but as community forums?
Yes.
Anything else about the work plan? All right. You all got all the minutes from the Commission on the Future of Public Education. And I'll say, I think Ben and I attended one of those meetings remotely. And I thought that the minutes of that meeting fairly well reflected it, but I also agree with Alex, or Alex agrees with me, that I personally find those minutes rather difficult to follow.
Yeah.
Some other folks do too, I guess. I don't know what to do about that other than if you have the time, actually get on the internet and listen to the meeting. It makes more sense live than it does in the minutes. Does anybody have anything that they want us as a board to raise with the commission? Or Jim or Melanie, any suggestions at all about whether we as a board should be doing anything regarding what the commission's up to so far?
I think it just quick, I think the board is still, it's actually an important point as they're figuring out what they're going to do. I've been trying to track them a little bit. At the same time, until they actually set that out in stone. They have multiple committees at this point too. Community Engagement Committee there actually is headed up by Oliver Olson of all things. But I think we'll look to try to report to the board in a little more succinct form what's happening there as time goes by. But I don't, at this point, there's not a lot of substance to provide.
Dick?
They just seem to be gathering data, a lot of credible amount of data. I'm not sure that all of it's relevant to the decisions that they're making, but at the same time, they're charting a path to try and be done, the first objective by December, and the recommendations. Right now, having read the minutes, I have no idea what direction they're going in.
Which is true. I think, and Randy at her superintendent's report made a really important point that the data they're using, the Agency of Education provided this nice little, overview of data. Problem is, a lot of their data still is not wonderful. It is not all that accurate. And so we're trying to make sure that our data is accurate in any case. But that's something that's going to be very important as time goes on, to make sure that people understand that if they're trying to use the data provided, that the data is good.
Anybody else have any comments or questions on the work of the commission? Ben?
Just that as a board, we have somewhat, I wouldn't call it unprecedented access, but we certainly have a lot of access compared to other districts by having both Oliver and Jennifer Samuelson on this committee. And I do think if there's an opportunity, or we could create an opportunity for some of our board members, perhaps for a chair or others from the BRSU, to meet with them and just at some point along this process and have a meeting to sort of get an update on where things are going, and if there are things that we ought to inform ourselves on as a board and provide input, it'd be good to know. Because it is hard to, in reading these minutes and even at the meeting, know how we can weigh in. And
it's hard. I think one thing to note is the VSBA is taking an active part and is trying to, their goal is to provide school board members with decent amount of information about what's going on there. At the same time, I think we always need to recognize that the VSBA, while they do a whole lot of great stuff for us, there are some places where their interests differ from ours, and we need to focus on that.
Yeah.
And that's where having Oliver on that commission is very important.
I think one thing we could do is if one of us happens to either be listening to the minutes, listening to the meeting or reading the minutes and see something that one of our board members believes ought to be brought to the board's attention, I think you could certainly tell me or Dick or David that it's something we ought to put on the next agenda.
I think your suggestion of meeting with Oliver and Mrs. Samuelson would be a good idea sometime in the early or middle of November, just to see, because they're running up against a deadline of making suggestions, where they really are and what we need to weigh in on. So I think we could probably, in the next meeting, as part of the agenda, take the people who have taken the time to listen to some of these things and put that as the committee to meet with that group as perhaps a point of discussion for the next board meeting.
Great.
Any other discussion on this item? And that segues into future agenda items, because now we have one. Lindsay?
Something that I thought we forgot to mention that I was just noticing, didn't we agree in the community engagement that all the regular business meetings would be at the BRSU, and that because we were going to hold the community forums at the schools? And I was just thinking, we were gonna ask them to vote that we can change that.
Yes.
Good
Change
point.
it Just November and just, November?
There was,
We were gonna go
I don't remember.
here. And
Minutes.
Yeah, look
we, each one was warned.
It wasn't an emotion, was it?
It was.
I just want to check the
Until
motion
January.
and see if
I
we
think I
covered
wrote
that. I
in the
don't think we
immediate.
did.
November and December is what's in the minutes, according to Ben.
Right.
Right, the motion just covered where the forums are going to be, not where the board meetings were going to be. Would someone care to move to suspend the rules so we can add that to the agenda?
I move to suspend the rules.
Moved by Dick to suspend the rules to add this item to the agenda, seconded by Ben. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. All right, and now we need a motion.
I move that all board meetings be scheduled now at the BRSU
Through December.
Just November.
through December.
Okay. Motion to have the regular board meetings at the BRSU through December. Is there a second? Seconded by Melanie. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. That appears to pass unanimously, and it does. Thank you for noticing that.
Yeah, good catch.
All right, any other future agenda items? And now we're at the second time when we have a guaranteed public comment period. If anybody in the public would like to comment, yes.
Yes, sorry.
Penny Macheski.
I did pay attention, but I'm still not sure what the format of that October 23rd meeting will be. Is it going to be small groups or big group?
It'll be the entire group, I believe.
Entire group?
Yeah.
And will there be a hard closing at 8 p.m. or?
A what?
Hard closing.
I believe there has to be, the way the motion was worded, yes. That's not to say, by the way, somebody who didn't get to speak at one meeting could go to another one. The other idea I've had, just as apparently I'm going to be chairing these meetings, is to begin by circulating a sign-up sheet so that if somebody wants to be guaranteed they have a slot, they could sign up. Then if they decide they don't want to speak, they don't have to.
But there was a provision as well that if you wanted to elaborate on comments, you could submit something in writing. And that was also part of the motion. In fact, anybody in the entire district can submit anything in writing that they choose to address to the board.
Do you mind sharing your name with us, just so I can note it for the minutes?
This is Penny Macheski,
Oh, thank you.
Macheski, right? Yes. Yes, Mr. Salat, Eric.
Thank you. I just had one comment because there seems to be a lot of financial pressure on the taxpayer and the community. We just had our school taxes go up significantly. I think there's a lot of conjecture about what's going to happen over the next couple of years because there's no end to this way the laws are constructed. We've got to face that. We've got to face a construction program of about $75 million for our existing schools. Plus, I heard the estimate, maybe it's incorrect, the $20 to $50 million cost for a middle school. So when you add all those together, it's quite an additional burden on the community.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Tom Lawrence, Sunderland. I wasn't planning on speaking, so thanks in advance for listening to me thinking as I speak. I guess to start with, obviously I'm a little biased. I love my school that my kids go to. I support my teachers, the principal, and this whole adventure that we're going on with school closures, I still haven't figured out why. That's unclear, and I feel like educational needs. So I guess, I don't need an answer unless you want to provide an answer, but I feel like the only thing that's guaranteed right now that we know for sure is that if we close the school, it's permanent. Everything else, the consultant reports, made up numbers, 2026 figures, that's just made up. That's urgent. That's to perform and get some kind of action for the community to force an answer. So I guess the only thing I want to say remaining is that sometimes the best thing to do is just pause and come up with a plan and then move forward, because again, the only thing permanent is the school closure, and that's a pretty big deal to just contemplate. We have to move, we have to be urgent when everything's hidden in the lockbox. There's no answers. So that's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Yes, Penny.
How are notices and agendas of meetings sent? I get mine by email because I clicked the thing on the, on your page, but how else do they come out?
Bob, do you want to talk about that? Bob Niles?
Well, they're usually, we send out press releases on meetings. They're in the Manchester Journal. They're posted on the website. Just as they're
Manchester.
We put things out in social media, Facebook, and certain media outlets.
Is it on your Facebook page?
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay.
They're also posted in the traditional spots in town, the post offices and at town hall.
The town clerk's office, they come out Friday, and the town clerk's office is closed Friday and Danby. So I don't think they're ever really posted. And maybe in your next agenda, you could consider maybe sending them out a little earlier.
Part of the reason the agenda comes out solely is that the agenda, although we start trying to put something together, tends to come out on Thursday or Friday before the meetings. So,
Maybe just the notices could come out a little early.
but usually we post the agenda at the same time.
Yeah.
The board,
They say it's not getting posted.
the board, for example, only gets its packet usually on Thursday, sometimes not until Friday.
But the meeting schedules are set for a year at a time. So we know what the meeting schedule's set for a year at a time. So we know what all the meeting dates and all are, that's all
Oh, okay. Well,
in there.
it's just, I know it's not being posted in Danby because it comes out on a Friday and the town clerk's office is closed on a Friday, maybe in the post office. So that's the only,
Yeah.
I get
So
one.
if you're in Danby and you're looking for it, you don't see it until Monday, and
Yeah, no, I appreciate that information, Penny, and we can try to, like you said, just get the agenda out on Wednesday or Thursday, even if the packet's not ready. So that's helpful feedback, and I appreciate that, and we can work to do that for you. And I'm so glad you found the spot. We added this spot after the last meeting for people in the public who wanted to receive the information. We did have a few people sign up. Thank you for doing that. Glad you found it.
one other thing is that I and maybe some other board members who live in towns that have front porch forum could do a better job of posting things there. I usually think of it, but only a couple of days ahead of time, and I've got to put it on my calendar or something. It's apparently nothing we can delegate. It appears that if you live in Peru, you can't post something on, let's say, the Danby Front Porch Forum.
Correct.
Oh, yeah, probably. I never post on there.
Yeah, Melanie?
To that point, even if you submit it to the forum on a Friday or Thursday, it might not get emailed to everybody till Sunday. Is there a place that you recommend in town that it could be physically posted, that people would see it on Friday?
Well, people are in and out of the town office all the time, and so if it were sent even a couple of days earlier.
Is there one on Friday, though, if we don't get it out?
Would the post office work? The bulletin board and the post office?
I've never looked there.
Okay.
So I don't know, it might be there, you know, it is.
Thank you for bringing that up.
I mean, I get mine in my email, so it's,
It's hard in all of our communities to find one central spot that everybody sees.
yeah.
Any other comments?
Is that open on Friday?
Saturday.
The dump?
Okay,
I love that idea.
Yeah, post it
Everybody
to the
goes to the dump.
I was just wondering, what about the dump?
seriously.
Everyone seems to go there on Saturdays.
Yeah, but then you need to print it out and post it there, because the town office.
Which we could, yeah,
Could do that.
you can do.
I am at football and hockey.
All right, I think it's time for a motion to.
Question in the chat, yeah.
Oh, sorry, we don't use the
Sorry.
chat. Do you have a question you want to ask for public comment?
Can you hear me, Randy? I put it in the chat.
Oh, yeah, we don't use the chat, so can you just ask it? We can all hear you.
Sure, quickly. I wanted to follow up to Jim's question earlier to the board when he asked for some direction regarding the small group discussion in the community, if requested. Not necessarily to drill on questions about the community engagement, because there's going to be a forum for that, but if board members can meet with community members if they're requested and just have some conversation about what's going on in meetings, because sometimes the large meeting to discuss kind of shies people away, plus the timing, like some moms with kids can't come to these at night. So kind of like what Randy does with her coffee hour, if that's something he kind of mentioned, but it was passed over.
Thank you.
It could be included in next steps.
But for now, I can't do it.
I mean,
Ellen?
anybody can approach us at any time, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we're still members of the public. But you're asking for something different, which is hosting a forum
No.
with a few, which is fine, but we should drill, I just think we should need
I
to
just
drill
had some
down.
parents coming and saying, and I wasn't, I felt uncomfortable because we're entering into this community engagement thing. If I end up saying, sure, we can all sit down, and if it turns out to be 20 parents or something,
Right.
then am I, being a bad guy, Or am I creating, am I front running the process?
Right, for example, would we want to encourage 4 or 5 board members without consulting with the rest of the board to say, well, we're going to meet with the public at Charlie's Coffee House Tuesday? Probably not.
Well,
Lindsay?
if I was invited to a PTA meeting, would I be obliged to say no?
No. But I think what Jim's talking
Is that
about is
different,
us
though?
organizing a forum without
Well, this is,
consulting the rest of the board.
Actually, in this case, it might not be, my guess is it would be a lot on the the reorganization discussion, but I don't know, it could be other things. Dave?
David?
It was more of a like the PTA, like I'm on the DPV at Dorset, and those of us that meet monthly, there's a couple of us, we're kind of like, we'd like to have a representative at the meetings at times to kind of just keep us informed, so then we can help answer questions that not necessarily questions, but just be like, oh, we'll come to the board meeting because they've been talking about this, or yeah, maybe that's something we want to bring up because it's not being talked about. Like, nobody just seems to kind of know, and we would love to have different representatives at our meetings, if it would be okay.
Bob Niles, who's here, tries to keep track of things like that and actually sends the board a list of meetings that we could attend. I don't recall Dorset PTA meeting showing up there recently, though. Is there a...
It has been there in the past, I just haven't seen it.
Yeah. So maybe you would want to make sure to email the BRSU with the dates of your meetings, just to make sure they show up on Bob's calendar.
And I can check with the school as well.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah, Lindsay and then David. Oh, sorry, David and then Lindsay.
I wanted to jump in and say, if we step back and look at the original conception of the Taconic and Green, it was intended to bring people from different parts of our disparate community. And so we have different parts, and yes, we represent all of our kids, but some of us know different parts better than others. So I think we should be allowed to meet with smaller groups and continue to know our different areas better, because we don't go into the schools once a month like we used to for school board meetings and things like that. So it's harder to be connected. So to have an opportunity to meet with our communities and then share whatever insights come from that are useful for the entire board, I think is a fundamental part of what the Taconic and Green was meant to be. So I think we should be allowed to do that.
Lindsay?
The only thing I get nervous about is you meeting and the misinformation that could be taken from that. And then the next time we have a meeting, we're having people come to us with stuff that have been misinterpreted, and then we're trying to tamper that down. That would be the only thing that I can see coming from having a meeting like that.
Ben, then Alex?
I just quickly, I mean, I agree with David, and I think we just have to remind ourselves, Lindsay, I think you're bringing up valid concerns, but we have to remind ourselves as a board that whenever we're out in the public, we cannot speak for the board, and we just need to, as long as we keep remembering that and keep saying that, so like, I'm here at this, and I have gone to a couple of parent meetings at Floodbrook at different times, and I've been a parent there, but I've also gone, I've said, I'm a board member too, but I'm not speaking for the board. In this case, I'll listen as a board member, and if I'm speaking and I might clarify something, but I'm really gonna speak as a parent. And, so I think that's, if you go into it from that angle and they're really clear about it, then people can misinterpret what we say all over the place, and that, there's nothing we can do about that. But if we're clear, and I absolutely agree with David that that is one of the things that we can do that's a benefit, that could be a benefit to our collective district if we have that perspective.
Alex?
I agree with Ben. I'm worried, or I'm concerned that it could become a slippery slope kind of a situation, but Lindsay and I are both on the Courier PTA. We're here once a month. It hasn't happened, so just throwing that out there too.
I mean, historically, I probably would have just said yes and gone and done it, but when we're in the middle of trying to reach out to communities with a particular message, then I get a little worried.
Yeah, Melanie?
I do think it's different if you're being invited to a space versus hosting like a subcommittee of the board, right? So if you and David were to host a subcommittee, that's very different than being invited to somewhere to help with clarifying questions. And as long as we're sticking to our missions and our goals, I guess, we need to be very careful that we are not town against town in this process. And we need to be careful that, all of what we're doing is with the intention of listening and gathering and not plotting town by town, right? And I think everybody here totally agrees with that, but, it's just different. And if we are intentionally having subgroups and hosting them as such, I don't think that sends a good message.
David, bearing in mind that it is now 9:10, we do have an executive session still.
Let's go.
Thank you. Dick, do you want to make a motion?
Yeah. I move that the board go into executive session regarding the superintendent evaluation for Title I, BSA, paragraph 313A13.
Thank you. Is there a second?